Clearing the fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed on We Act Radio, 1480 AM. This is Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese is here as well. Good to see you again.
Yes, and today we have an important topic to talk about. The whole show is going to be devoted to the topic of nuclear energy.
Great.
And we're going to start out with Arnie Gundersen. Arnie is a former nuclear industry insider and now an independent consultant and chief engineer with Fairewinds Consulting. He wrote about the recent Diet Commission report about Fukushima, that he's been saying for almost a year that Fukushima was a man-made disaster and that we face the same sort of risks here in the United States. Welcome to our program, Arnie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Happy to have you on with us. We really appreciate it. What is the Diet Commission report? Give us just our listeners know what that is.
Well, the Diet is the equivalent of the Japanese of the legislature in Japan, and they had a commission of members of the legislature. They're not technical PhDs in nuclear. They are essentially citizen legislators, and they looked at Fukushima to determine what they felt were the real root causes of the accident. I was over in Tokyo back in February and got to talk with them for about 3 hours, and they were just concerned citizens who were dedicating a half a year of their lives to try to get to the bottom of it.
Wow, that's a pretty interesting approach to looking at problems that we don't seem to copy here. I like that. So what did they find?
Well, they found that there's an insidious relationship between the owners of the power plants, and there's essentially 9 huge utilities in Japan, and the government.
Well, that sounds like the United States.
They would like to. The government of the United States would like to say there's different, but but they basically within Japan, the regulator reports up through the most powerful ministry in Japan, but it's a pro-nuclear, pro-energy regulator. So they're whatever attempt they might have made at regulation was being sat on by higher-ups in the chain.
So you write that they actually knew ahead of time that there were risks, but they downplayed the risks of the Fukushima reactor?
Yes. It's absolutely clear that for the last 20 years at least, independent scientists were saying that the record, as you walk along the beach and you walk inland, they could determine that about every 600-700 years a huge tsunami would come. And this is a tsunami on the order of what hit Fukushima. So the odds of a 14-meter, a 45-foot high tsunami were about once in 700 years, and the Japanese thought that was more like a once in a 100,000-year event. So yeah, they had plenty of warning, and then Tokyo Electric continued to meet with the regulator and pencil the problem away.
Now, did they have warning that the plant couldn't handle that kind of a wave?
Yes, the plant could only handle about a 26-foot wave.
Wow.
So they knew it could only handle a 26-foot wave. They had scientists saying a 45-foot wave was likely. And they basically sat and convened meetings about it for 20 years and never did anything about it because the experts weren't in the clique, in the scientific priesthood, if you will, that they were listening to.
And then in the report that you did with Greenpeace, you said that the emergency plans and evacuation plans that they had put into effect were not sufficient when the disaster occurred.
Yes, Greenpeace picked that out, and the Diet also said that. Of any people on the planet, the Japanese have the best emergency plans because earthquakes happen. So one would have expected they would have reacted the best. And if that's the best humankind can expect, we have serious problems with emergency planning on the American nukes.
Yeah, I always thought that one way to kill nukes in the United States was to actually have a fire drill, kind of an evacuation drill, Let's do an evacuation drill for
happen?
New York City, for the plant that's upriver, and see how that worked out. I think that would end nuclear.
Assumptions on emergency planning. For instance, they assume that if the accident occurs during school, mothers will not hop in their cars and drive to school to get the kids.
Mm.
Wow, the opposite.
As a mother of 3, I can say.
The opposite is true.
Right.
They also assume that the traffic lights all work.
Oh, great.
Mm.
And all this kind of stuff. So, and that it occurs on a sunny day, and they never assume that an act of nature causes the event, which then also disables a lot of the emergency planning. That's not part of the drills that we do here in the United States.
Right. So that obviously played a major factor in not being able to evacuate adequately.
Yeah, there's two pieces. The first piece was they had the prior warning from experts for years. But the second piece was that the government really didn't want to hear the truth. I was on CNN 4 days after the accident saying this is as bad as Chernobyl. And the Japanese finally admitted it 8 weeks later.
Right.
And in the meantime, you've got women and children that should have been evacuated out and weren't, all because I don't think they really wanted their bosses to know how serious the problem really was.
Now, I've read some articles, and I don't completely understand them. Maybe you can explain them a bit, about the risk not being over, that there's actually some even bigger risks ahead from this disaster, from this man-made disaster?
The Unit 4 is the one furthest on the left as you look at them. And all of the fuel was removed from the nuclear reactor, but it's out of the nuclear containment, and it's still physically hot. When the chain reaction stops, that doesn't mean the fuel gets cold, because there's lots of residual products called daughter products that decay. Well, it takes like 5 or 6 years for them finally to get cool enough. Now, the building is obviously beat up, and if there's another earthquake, it will collapse, and then you can have something called a fuel pool fire. Brookhaven National Labs looked at a fuel pool fire and determined that you can expect 186,000 cancer fatalities from it.
186,000, and what kind of a geographic range?
Well, they were looking at a 40 square mile area would have to be permanently evacuated.
Wow.
Permanently.
Yeah. Now, this one would actually be worse because there's more fuel in this pool than Brookhaven looked at. But it's the kind of event that could easily cut Japan in half. If the winds are blowing toward China, as opposed to out to sea, it will deposit radioactive material inland in quantities such that you couldn't use the land for 300 or 400 years.
And would that kind of a disaster have impact in other, like North America?
Yes, it really. It depends. It depends. If you if there's you need about a Richter 7 earthquake. They don't happen every day. Right. But we know one happened 2 years ago, so it's not certainly within the realm of possibility. If the fuel is not cooled, it will burn, and it will volatilize and go airborne. Blow across the Pacific and at least nail the Cascades. It may not it may not do much beyond the Cascades, but we found from the first accident.
So the Cascades meaning the west coast of the United States.
Yes, anything to the west of the mountain range that butts up against the Pacific. It's like a rainforest there, and the air comes across, hits the rainforest, comes down, and it's pretty clear that Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver got nailed by radiation back in April of last year from Fukushima. And the same thing would happen, but even more so because there's more radioactivity in this fuel pool at Unit 4. So, it's a serious concern. And the only solution is to get the fuel out as fast as possible. And Tokyo Electric has taken their time.
And what do you think is behind that?
Money. I don't think Tokyo Electric has the cash. And they're basically fighting an accident based on what cash is available, as opposed to fighting the accident based on the fact that human lives are at stake.
But it is something that is solvable if the money was put into it.
Well, a year ago, I was on Chris Martinson's radio show, And he said, what would you do? I said, I'd build a building over the building and use that to remove the fuel as fast as possible. Just last month, Tokyo Electric came up with a plan. Guess what?
Build a building.
Build a building over the building. So I had a couple other recommendations that I've been given to the Japanese, and one of them was categorically rejected. They said, this is a great idea. We don't have the money.
But why, if this is something that could affect, obviously, the Pacific Ocean, the west coast of the United States,
a large part of Japan,
or if the wind blows the other direction, a large part of China. I mean, why isn't there more international support to solve the problem? I would think this would be a priority for the United States. We don't want to see Portland and Seattle and San Francisco, hit with radiation.
Well, you're absolutely right. It should be. There's one U.S. senator who happens to come from Oregon who's making a similar argument that this is no longer a Japanese problem, but an American problem and a worldwide problem. There's also a Japanese ambassador named Akio Matsumura, and Akio and I have been working on this for about 14 months. And so at the ambassador level and at the Senate, U.S. Senate level, it's finally getting the attention that it deserves. But still there's no movement, but we are getting finally some attention on it.
Has President Obama said anything about this?
As I understand it, the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is giving support and guidance to the Japanese, but they're not taking any position on what the Japanese should do. It's their country. Let them do what they want. But it's not like this radiation stops at the Pacific Ocean. It comes right over.
Wow. So I'm hoping we need to take a short break, and I'm hoping when we come back we can talk a little bit about some of the other statements that you made, saying that the Diet Commission report may be misused in the United States to say that similar accidents can't happen here, and what really are the risks here in the United States. You're listening to We Act Radio, Clearing the Fog, Speaking Truth to Expose the Forces of Greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese and our guest, Arnie Gundersen, who's a expert on nuclear energy. And we started the last segment talking about the Fukushima accident, the Diet Commission report. And now we want to turn to the United States a little bit.
Yeah, actually this No Nukes concert we were just talking during the break happened the summer after the 3 Mile Island accident. And Arnie, you testified in the hearings on the 3 Mile Island.
Yes, I did. I actually had people working on the 3 Mile Island site in the 80s, and then I became an expert on during the trial, which occurred in the 90s. I have to add, though, I have another song for you to add to your playlist there. Harry Chapin wrote a song called "The Rock," and it talks about someone who sees a danger and the rest of the world does not. I recommend your listeners listen to it. It's a good one.
That sounds like a good one worth talking about. So we want to talk about what the Diet Commission report means to the United States. How do you see that playing out here?
Well, I see the same problems in the United States that the Japanese have. We've got a cloistered group of executives who only speak to experts who give them the answers they want, and they then speak to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And it really is what someone has called for years now a nuclear priesthood. Unless you're part of the established orthodoxy, you are shunned. Now, that's happened here in the States repeatedly. The most recent one is with Chairman Yasko, who was basically run out of town over the last 6 months. The industry got Congress to hold congressional hearings about his management style.
What was he in charge? Tell us about him.
He was the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
I was asking Arnie to tell us.
I'm sorry.
I know you know the answer, though.
I'm sorry, too. I'm kind of an insider user. Yeah, he and all he was, there's 5 commissioners. He was the chair, appointed by President Obama. He wasn't an anti-nuclear guy. He was just a regulator trying to regulate. And on Fukushima, for instance, he insisted that modifications be made to power plants on a expeditious schedule in order to accommodate what we've learned. And he encountered resistance from the industry and from the 4 commissioners other than himself, who every commissioner has been personally vetted by NEI, which is the trade organization, Nuclear Energy Institute. For the last 20 years, the people that are responsible for promoting nuclear have been personally vetting the commissioners who are responsible for regulating nuclear. So I don't think that's much different than we have in Japan.
No, it sounds the same.
A former chairman, Peter Bradford, said, there are no Democrats and Republicans when it comes to nuclear. He says they've all been co-opted by the industry. So
well, that's not only a problem with nuclear energy, it's an issue on many issues that we work on.
Yeah.
So anyway, this chairman was removed.
Yes. Well, he resigned, and he was just replaced by someone named Allison McFarland, who came from one of the universities in Virginia. So she's apparently quite talented, and I wish her well.
Well, I hope that she shows some independence from the industry.
On this issue of industry independence, there's another leg of this, and that's the United Nations. They have a group called the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they Part 2 of their charter says their job is to promote nuclear power. So they not regulate, to promote nuclear power. So they were in Japan for 20 or 30 years writing glowing reports about the Japanese. And if these problems were so evident and so uniquely Japanese, my question is, where was the international watchdog? And in fact, we don't have an international watchdog because of the fact that the industry's been co-opted.
So the Fukushima plant was a General Electric design plant, is that right?
It was Unit 1 was entirely built by Americans. Ebasco was the engineer, and General Electric was the reactor. Unit 2 was Ebasco and GE, but more Japanese were involved, and they wanted to learn how to do it themselves. So when they got to 3 and 4, it was more Japanese and less American. But the first reactor to explode was Unit 1, and it was all American. So it's hard for the Japanese to point a finger at Japan and say we did it to ourselves.
And is the design of those plants one that's been used in the United States?
Yes, there's 23 reactors, almost identical to them in the United States. Some just north of Washington, one in New Jersey, one right outside of Boston, one here in Vermont, a bunch just south of Chicago. So there's 23 of these Mark I reactors. And, it's interesting. When my wife and I were walking right before the accident, and she said, where's going to be the next accident? And I said, I don't know where, but I know it's going to be in a Mark I design.
Why is that?
3 weeks later, we had Fukushima.
And why? What's the problem with the Mark I design?
Well, it was crummy back in the early 70s when they licensed it. There's an NRC memo that was FOIA'd, and it shows that in 1972, the NRC regretted ever having licensed it. But if they took the license back, they were afraid they would kill nuclear power forever.
Wouldn't be such
and
a
what was the
bad thing.
problem with the design? What were they critical of?
It's too small. There's too much power in too small a place. A lot of reactors have enormous containments, and the containment on the Mark I is less than 10% the size of all the others. During the accident...
Less than 10%?
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds tiny.
Yeah, it's a very tiny containment. During the accident, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was saying, well, yeah, but there's mitigating issues, et cetera. But during the accident, 3 days in, a guy named Chuck Castro, who's at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, a real high-level guy, blurts out in a phone call, these Mark I's are the worst containment in the world. So the NRC has known it. I mean, what I was telling my wife is nothing that wasn't known. It's just that they can't do anything about it because they're so co-opted by the people they're supposed to be regulating.
It doesn't seem like that would be a problem that's not solvable, though. I mean, if the idea is just to expand containment, can't they just build additional containment areas for these plants and solve the problem?
Well, on the Mark I's, they're 40 years old. Almost all these are pushing 40, and the NRC just gave them a license for another 20. And the problem is if you put a containment over the containment, they get so expensive that it's cheaper to shut them down.
Interesting. Now, the Yankee nuclear reactor up in Vermont,
Vermont Yankee,
Vermont Yankee is also 40 years old. I mean, if they licensed it for 40 years, is there a reason why they picked that time frame? How reliable is it now?
Is there a lifespan for these things?
Yeah.
Well, I was and Vermont Yankee is the same design as Fukushima, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I started out right out of college in '72, the same year Vermont Yankee got its license, and the document, when we designed them to last for 40 years. Now, what they've gone back over is sharpened their pencils and said, well, yeah, but the stresses really weren't as bad as we thought. With the new computer codes, we can get another 20 out of them. The problem is it's a ratchet that only goes one way. When they've been grandfathered in, there's a grandfather clause within the nuclear law. Mm-hmm. And, for instance, this Mark I design, everybody knows it's a crummy design, but because they approved it in 1970, that issue was not on the table come 2010 when those reactors were reevaluated. You couldn't bring up an issue like that. You could only bring up aging management issues, which talked about, would the plant deteriorate any further than it was already designed for.
Wow. So these 23 plants that are on the same model, are they built in areas that have like earthquake possibilities or other environmental catastrophes that could make us in a Fukushima situation?
Well, we don't have...
not going to have a tidal wave.
We don't have tsunamis. But that's not what took out... That's another one of these myths. That's not... A tidal wave did not flood the diesels. I'm sure that everybody's heard that this tidal wave came in and flooded the diesels. What happened is that the pumps along the water that cool the diesels were destroyed, and that can occur from a flood. It doesn't have to be a tidal wave. So they lost the ability to cool the diesels. And in fact, the other little-known fact is there were 14 power plants that were affected, not just 4. 6 at Fukushima, Daiichi, 4 at Daini, 3 at Anagawa, and 1 at Tokai. And they had 37 diesels between them. 24 of them failed because the pumps that cool them flooded. So this is not something like a tsunami is going to wipe out the diesels. The issue is a flood can take out the cooling pumps that are right along the water.
With the Fukushima experience, with the Chernobyl experience, 3 Mile Island, these are coming pretty regularly for such the magnitude of the impact of those kinds of events. What do you think we should be doing? Is nuclear, we're very dependent on it as far as the percentage of our electricity goes. What should we be doing to try to deal with this as an energy source?
Yeah. Well, nuclear as an energy source only represents 6% of what the United States uses. It's 20% of the electric use, but it's 6% of our total energy mix. My opinion is the price of new nuclear is going to make them not competitive anyway. So we're not going to build any new nuclear plants unless Congress issues loan guarantees.
That's not a very big leap, is it?
Right. So what's Congress doing? Even though they're not competitive in the marketplace, Congress is giving out loan guarantees, which you and I as taxpayers are backing up when these plants go belly up.
Right.
But really, these plants are not competitive, so the new plants should not. I would expect not many, and hopefully very few, will get built. Then you've got 100 old plants, and they're all over 30 years old. All these plants are like me. They started life in nuclear in the 70s or early 80s, and they are approaching the end of their 40-year life. We can, if we just conserved the way the French do, we wouldn't need these nuclear plants. If we, we're not talking about going back to be cavemen or something like that. But if we ran our country the way the French do, with lower energy per capita consumption, we wouldn't need our nuclear power plants. So
conservation alone, without any other new energy source, is enough for us to break our nuclear addiction.
You've got it.
Wow.
And add to that maybe improving the efficiency of the transmission of our power, and
I wonder how many jobs it would create to become more
to
efficient.
rebuild
too.
our
It'd
power
probably be a
infrastructure.
very positive for the economy in that way as well.
Yeah.
So you could phase the plants out. You know, I recommend these 23 be shut down immediately, and then you're left with 80. And when they hit their 40th year, we had a deal. We had
That's
a
right.
40-year deal, and it's time to shake their hands, say thank you very much, and give them their watch and let them retire.
So we only have a couple minutes left. What I want to get from you in the end here is what should citizens, this is called We Act Radio, so we like to get people to take action. So what do you think people who are concerned about this should be doing to try to help to end the reliance on this dangerous energy source?
I would buttonhole your congressman. There's also a couple of really active groups that you could send some money to, Friends of the Earth, Natural Resource Defense Council, Fairewinds Associates.
A disclaimer, that's your group. Very important.
But the real key is in Congress. All roads lead to Congress here.
Mm-hmm.
If we change the way Congress acts, the regulator will become emboldened to actually regulate, and we'll have safe nuclear plants until they reach the end of their life. But unless Congress changes, we're not going to affect that culture of the safety culture we really need.
And your site is Fairewinds. That's FAIRE winds.com.
Yes, fairewinds.org.
.org. And
we've had 8 million visitors since Fukushima, and the Huffington Post rated us as the go-to site on Fukushima.
So fairewinds.org, if people want to read more about what you're working on and what you're thinking about on this issue.
Great.
It's the best place to go. Well, we really appreciate your insights, and this is the first half of a show we're going to do on nuclear.
And on the second half, we'll bring on Harvey Wasserman, longtime activist fighting nuclear power, to talk more about what his work is now to try to end nuclear power. So thank you so much for joining us today, Arnie. We're going to go out on this break with another song from You're listening to Clearing the Fog, Speaking Truth to Expose the Forces of Greed on We Act Radio with Margaret Flowers.
Kevin Zeiss as well.
And for the second half of our show, we're pleased to bring on our guest, Harvey Wasserman. He's a journalist, author, a democracy activist, and an advocate for renewable energy. He's been a strategist and organizer in the anti-nuclear movement in the United States for over 30 years. Welcome to our show, Harvey.
Thank you so much.
Oh, good. Glad to have you with us. So how do you see the nuclear...
Well, first we should fill Harvey in.
Oh, go ahead.
The first half of our show, we had Arnie Gundersen on, and he was talking about the Diet Commission report in Japan and the fact that the Mark I reactors, we have 23 of those here in the U.S., and that they pose a real risk.
As well as the overall aging of the nuclear
plants nationwide.
in the country, and
right.
They're nearing the end of their lifespan.
Arnie is a great expert, and Arnie Gundersen is an incredible work. People should go to Fairewinds, FAIREWINDS, I think it's .org, and
right.
see his beautiful videos. And I post many of them at nukefree.org, NUKEFREE.org, where sponsored by Bonnie Ray Jackson Brown and Graham Nash, where we post all the breaking news about Fukushima and about renewable energy.
Fantastic.
Great.
So Fukushima, as Arnie told you, I'm sure, it's an apocalypse in progress, is what it is, really.
Right.
That's right.
Because we have this spent fuel pool perched 100 feet in the air, ready to come crashing down, God forbid, if there's an earthquake, which everybody believes there will be one.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an instance now where people yelling has had an impact, because the Japanese now say they will, as quickly as possible, within the year, hopefully, get those fuel rods down on the ground. Where they can be controlled. It's going to be a really hard thing to do. I mean, this building is collapsing. How do you build and move in equipment to lower down? I think it's over 100. I'm not sure how many tons it is actually. I think it's close to 100 tons of incredibly radioactive material without killing everybody working on the project. I mean,
wow.
a single spent fuel rod, if you're within 100 feet, will kill you in 5 or 10 minutes, and there's no technology. This has never been done before. So this is going to be a really real, and God forbid if they screw it up and these fuel rods fall. This is a sword of Damocles being held over all of humanity, because the amount of cesium in this one spent fuel pool is been estimated at being at least 20 times more than was released at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this is a really big deal. All of Japan could be rendered uninhabitable by this.
Mm.
Amazing, and we face risk of a similar type of situation occurring here in the United States. Harvey, can you tell us what kind of work is going on right now, activist energy, to try to end nuclear energy here in the U.S.?
Well, in the U.S., we have a really big fight going on because there are 4 reactors more or less under construction in the United States now, and that's only 4. So that's in a way good news, because they were talking about this ridiculous nuclear renaissance and all these other ideas that we're going to build many, many more reactors here, and it's just not going to happen. So we have 2 under construction in South Carolina, and those plants allegedly are being privately funded. I have my doubts, frankly. I think they're going to come to the federal government at some point, because they're just not going to be able to pull it off. They are soaking the ratepayers of South and North Carolina. Duke Energy has just merged with Progress Energy, becoming the biggest or one of the biggest nuclear utilities in the country, and they have tremendous financial problems, let's put it that way, and I'll come back to that. The other project is, and they're already over $500 million over budget and way behind schedule, even though they just started building about a year ago. It's mind-boggling. And these people will not give us a firm price tag, by the way. When you ask these companies, well, how much are these reactors going to cost, they say, well, it's proprietary information. We're not going to tell you. The fact is, they don't know.
Yeah.
You know, can you imagine walking into a store and you want to buy something and you say, well, we can't tell you how much it's going to cost, so just bill your credit card.
And so where is this plant?
This is at the VC Summer site in South Carolina.
Okay.
And now the other one, which is looking for federal money, is the Vogtle site, Vogtle. That's in Georgia, and that one is 2 more reactors. There are 2 reactors already there. They started construction about a year ago. Mm-hmm. They've already had faulty concrete. I mean, if you use your imagination, if somebody pours faulty concrete at the base of a house or any kind of big building, imagine the problems that arises. I mean,
wow.
you know, you're doomed from the start. And then they've also showed up with substandard rebar steel that doesn't meet the specifications laid out in the plans for the plant.
Are these cost cutting things, or what's the reason that's happening?
Who knows? You know, I mean, it could be corruption, it could be incompetence, it could be yes, cost cutting, but the idea that you're going to cut costs by pouring substandard
it's
concrete.
Crazy. It's crazy.
Beyond crazy. And actually, while we're mentioning concrete, you mentioned the older reactors in the United States. Many, if not most of these reactors, 30, 40 years old, concrete is definitely starting to crumble. It's just only so long the concrete is going to hold up under any circumstances. When you add in intense heat and radiation, it's going to deteriorate even further. So this is a national crisis. Now, at the Vogtle site, and this is, you asked what we can do, and you've been on my show, and we've talked about this, and you've been kind enough to post the petition. We have a petition link posted at nukefree.org because in 2010, Obama gave or allocated $8.33 billion in loan guarantees to finish the Vogtle plant. This is the first nuclear loan guarantee of a fund of $18.5 billion that was set up by George W. Bush, I believe in 2005. And the Department of Energy has been unable to spend this money because none of the utilities have been eager to build a nuclear plant, even with loan guarantees. So the Southern companies stepped forward, and they've been trying to get this money. But there's been a dispute. We thought until a couple that this was a bit. It turns out that the Office of Management and Budget.
Are you still there, Harvey? We're losing your. If you're in a bad spot, maybe if you're on a cell phone, I'm not sure, but we kind of lost your.
Here, now you're back.
You're back.
Here, I'm back?
Yeah.
Okay, so
you were saying the Office of Management and Budget, but again, we're getting a faulty connection. Let's see if we can make this work a little bit better. Still not hearing you very well, Harvey.
How's this?
That's good.
Okay, so the Office of Budget has come forward, and we believe it's all very secretive. And in fact, a Georgia citizen Freedom of Information Act to get any information at all. Negotiations on this 8.33 billion.
Yeah.
And I posted a piece on this at nukefree.org. The interest rate that is being set for this loan guarantee is 1 to 1.5%, and this is federal money.
Wow.
So if you can't get a student loan for 1 to 1.5%. You can't buy a house with a loan for 1 to 1.5%, and these guys aren't even being asked to put down a down payment.
Pretty amazing.
So
it is amazing. So we are circulating a petition, which I think you circulate on your websites,
right,
to stop this loan guarantee from going through. And if we do that, I believe that there will be no more nuclear plants built in the United States.
And
I think this will be the end.
Is there a cutoff for when this decision is going to be made? Or
well, we don't know. They extended it. They're being very vague and secretive about this. We believe that well, of course, if Romney comes in, I think Romney is going to push hard to give them more money. And Obama got loan guarantee. Cylinder Company went bankrupt. That was actually a Bush project.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because all the Republicans have been attacking Obama
for a Bush
Cylinder,
project,
which was a Bush loan, but they're not attacking him for Volca, which was an Obama loan.
Well, that's because they like nuclear. But
that's right.
I mean, and Obama's been a pretty strong cheerleader for nuclear.
He's been a cheerleader, but he hasn't done much for nuclear, and actually he's been stopping Yucca. I mean, I'm no fan of Barack Obama, believe me, but with all fairness, he has not allowed Yucca Mountain, the ridiculous repository, although we call it a suppository for nuclear waste in Nevada, to proceed. Now, of course, that's because Harry Reid is the Senate Majority Leader, and so he has approved this $8.33 billion loan. But Obama has been pretty aggressive about renewables. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that, having followed this, having been active in this issue for 40 years next year, we did reach a turning point, 2011. All the major financial journals and all the reports coming in indicate that in 2011, renewables crossed over the line with nukes and became very clearly cheaper. So that if you were, God forbid, Donald Trump, and you had $10 billion to invest in energy, and you didn't care about anything except making a profit, you would still go with renewables. Renewables has crossed over the turning point with nuclear, and according to General Electric, that radical left-wing organization, General Electric, they say they will have solar panels cheaper than coal within 5 years. So the renewable industry, the renewable revolution has really turned the corner. We're beyond the tipping point now, which is a very big deal for those of us who have been fighting nukes.
That's gigantic.
That's tremendous, and that's a good time to segue into our break. We're going to play the song from your group. It's called Solartopia, on your website, solartopia.org, that talks about green steps to a renewable future.
The nuclear plants were built in haste, with too many risks and no place for waste.
You're listening to We Act Radio, 1480 AM. This is Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
This is Kevin Zeese. We have Harvey Wasserman on, who's a longtime nuclear or anti-nuclear activist.
And pro-renewable.
And strong renewable advocates.
Right, and we were just talking before this break about the fact that renewable energy has passed the tipping point in this country of being
equal to nuclear.
Equal to nuclear.
In price.
Yeah.
And hopefully continue to go down.
It's far cheap. It's way cheaper now.
Yeah, nuclear is so expensive.
Go ahead.
There's no problem with radioactive waste, of course, with renewables. It creates way more jobs.
Right.
I mean, my little book, Solartopia, lays out the vision of a totally green-powered Earth. I initially thought of it at 2030, and every time I turn around, there's a new report saying it's getting closer.
Earlier. Great.
What you have with renewables, first of all, renewable energy will be a bigger industry than the internet. It will be the biggest industry in the history of the world.
Yep.
We will see in our lifetimes this is not hype. We will see in our lifetimes every car, every building, every machine, every cell phone, every parking lot covered with photovoltaic cells. They're plummeting in cost, and rising in efficiency very, very rapidly. The exact opposite of the nuclear industry.
Mm-hmm.
The nuclear industry has had a reverse learning curve. They keep getting worse. It's amazing.
That's right. It's amazing those people that still say that, looking at solar and wind and the other renewable resources, that we can't rely on them because wind doesn't always blow and the sun's not always out. And I mean, these people have no imagination.
Well, I'll give you two examples of how insane the nuclear industry has actually become. I mean, as I said, I've been on this industry for 40 years, and it never ceases to amaze me. So the first reactor went online in 1957 in Shippingport, Pennsylvania. You'd think they'd have learned something by now. They went in, and there's the reactor in Crystal River, Florida, and they went in and they spent $1 billion to upgrade this thing, and they cracked the containment 4 times. I mean, they will never reopen this thing. It's like taking your car to a mechanic and having them blow the engine. And then the other thing that they did, I mean, among the many, and this is a really big fight, I believe Crystal River, Florida will never reopen. And the other is there's 2 reactors at San Onofre in California between L.A. and San Diego. They're right on the ocean and right next to the highway. If you've ever driven between L.A. and San Diego along the beach there, that's where it is. And there were 3 reactors at San Onofre. One's been shut a long time. Last year or 2 years ago, the owners hired Mitsubishi to come in and upgrade the steam generators, which are a critical part of any nuclear reactor. And they screwed it up. They spent as much as $1 billion. As much as $100 million, and to allegedly make the steam generator work better. And they screwed it up so badly that they've had to shut both reactors, and neither of them will, it's highly likely neither will open again. This is 50 years of this industry, and they're still doing things like this. It's astounding.
So you asked us to publish an article on our website before this interview, The Exit of Nuclear Based on Consensus and Cash, by Gunter Pauli. Do you want to talk about that? And
well, yes, there are a number of issues, but basically the fact is, and really everybody who's been doing anti-nuclear work for a while has finally is now jumping on the fact that solar is cheaper, and that the tipping point has been reached. And this is a shall we say a gargantuan historic impact. It's in the history of technology, it's equivalent of the invention of the telephone or of electric utilities back in the 1880s. The fact that we are now at the transition point, and that article focuses on Germany. Now, let me talk about Germany very quickly. There's been a big anti-nuclear pro-green movement in Germany for many decades.
Right.
This past in 2011. They called for a big demonstration, a national demonstration against nuclear power. And in between the time they called for it and the time it occurred, Fukushima happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, everything went up by an order of magnitude. And the Prime Minister of Germany, Angela Merkel,
mm-hmm.
who's herself a chemist, by the way, said that she had decided after Fukushima that was it for nuclear. And, we don't know if that's a political story or if it's truly her heart that spoke there, but the Germans immediately shut 8 General Electric style reactors. Wow. And are phasing out the other 11 in the country. So all nuclear reactors in Japan will be shut by 2022. Now, all the pundits said, isn't this political, they're caving. Well, actually, if you look at it closely, Germany is, of course, a very corporate capitalist society. And I'm convinced that what really happened, in addition to the political stuff, and in addition possibly to Angela Merkel's change of heart, is that the major corporations in Germany sat down and did the numbers.
Right.
And say, hey, look, we think we can make more money in renewables. And Germany is into wind to the extent that they've actually run out of good wind sites on the mainland, and they have to go offshore.
Mm-hmm.
Germany, recently, there was a day, I believe it was in May,
right.
where 50% of Germany's electricity came from solar.
Wow.
Now, this is not exactly Florida we're talking about. This is Germany, which is not all that rich in solar resource like Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened, and Siemens, and this is a big deal, Siemens, of course, one of the biggest corporations in the world, which was at the core of the nuclear power industry, got out of nuclear entirely. and said, we're done. We're going to do solar and wind, and we don't want anything to do with nuclear anymore. And, that is a huge deal. And I will say also that the similar thing is now happening in France. France is supposedly the poster child of nuclear power. They've gotten 80% of their electricity from nukes. But the new socialist prime minister, Hollande, has had a strong, I wouldn't say it's a strong anti-nuclear background, but he's really not been a big fan of the EDF, the national utility, or Areva, which is the French company that builds nuclear. And so he has gone in, and he hasn't formally said it, but they will not be building more nukes in France.
Wow, that's a gigantic change for France. I mean, Germany before Fukushima was already on a path toward really emphasizing renewables.
Yes, and this is what turned it, and Fukushima turned it. I mean, you have to remember that Germany was, like the rest of Europe, was bathed in radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. Mm-hmm. And Europe was really traumatized, as well it should be, by Chernobyl. And so when Fukushima happened, boy, that really knocked it over the line. I will say very quickly that the collapse of the French industry, or at least the French impetus to build new reactors, has actually probably killed the conservative government in England's plans to build nuclear, because they're planning on doing it in partnership with the French, and now with Hollande in there, the socialists, they're not going to get funding, and Areva may not even be interested.
So do you see a consensus developing, not just the United States, but around the world, that nuclear's days are going to be behind us?
Absolutely, but there are two big question marks now, are China and India. Mm-hmm. After Fukushima, the Chinese they had 30 reactors proposed, and they put them on hold. China is pretty close to Fukushima. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in China. There is, we have this vision of China as being a shall we say, an ironclad dictatorship, but in fact there are major grassroots environmental movements all over India. All over China, and we believe that there is a strong enough no nukes movement in China to make an impact. That will be the final blow if we can stop them in China. And in India, as you may have covered, there is a huge grassroots movement against nuclear power in India. It's a little more accessible to the media and to our information, but there is a place called Kudankulam where they're trying to open 2 reactors, and there is a huge hunger strike going on. More than 300 women have been fasting to prevent against this reactor opening.
Isn't that something?
So the final, I believe that we have all but defeated the movement to build new big nukes in the United States. And as you mentioned, Kevin, the question now is shutting the old ones. There are 104, and the industry is holding a really hard line. They don't want to shut any, because I think they're aware that if we start shutting 1 or 2 here and there, the dam will break, and the domino theory will come forward, and a lot more of these reactors will go down.
You mentioned India and China and the importance of grassroots movements, and I want to get your impression of that. You've been involved in this for 40 years. How much of this is, if there wasn't the grassroots movements, wouldn't the economics and risks of nuclear
be sufficient?
Or do we need? How important is the grassroots movement?
Oh, it's global. It's incredibly powerful. We owe a lot to the internet. People in Europe, Europe is darn close to having a definitive, turn against nuclear, even throughout the whole continent. There are a couple countries that are talking about Czechoslovakia, for example. But the grassroots movement there against nuclear is incredibly strong. Here we have a good, strong grassroots movement, reactor by reactor. I mean, federally, at this point, there's only one thing we can do, which is to stop the loan guarantees, and then stop the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which we refer to as no real chance, or nobody really cares,
right.
From doing all this relicensing. So I would venture to say that every reactor site in this country has a pretty strong, if not very strong, grassroots movement, starting with Vermont, where I'm talking to you from now, actually, where the state legislature has voted 26-4 to shut the reactor here. And now in Southern California on San Onofre. So some of it is situational. When you have a reactor that's particularly vulnerable like these, Indian Point also in New York, a very, very strong grassroots movements which have gone all the way up to the governor.
Well, I hope someday, maybe soon, you can reflect on the importance of the grassroots movement over the last 40 years, because there may be a lot of lessons we can learn in the broader
struggle
for social, against corporate power and the concentrated wealth and the whole Occupy. There's probably a lot we can learn from that.
Let me put it this way, Kevin and Margaret. In 1974, Richard Nixon said there would be 1,000 nuclear reactors in the United States by the year 2000. At the time, there were 250 online, under construction, or on order. Our grassroots anti-nuclear movement just got going pretty much that year. And as of 2000, there were 104. And I would say that the grassroots anti-nuclear movement in the United States was responsible for killing upwards of 900 reactor projects. Can you imagine?
That's tremendous. We've run out of time, Harvey. Thanks for joining us. So the website you recommend is nukefree.org.
Yes, and solartopia.org is mine, and I'll see you in Solartopia as Occupy wins a totally green-powered Earth.
We're with you on that. All right. Thank you, Harvey.
So much. Bye-bye.
Like I say, go to the Remix button, hit the Remix button. That way you'll have this video and keep up with this. Otherwise, YouTube's just going to control us, guys, and it's really bad.